The WRX early on had lots of transmission problems once he started putting the power down, and so I just rebuilt an alarming amount of gearboxes.
Everyone knows that it's a potential failure point in this vehicle, and the more you have knock events, it's more likely that you'll see a ringland failure happen.
The factory downpipe is very, very restrictive. Once you do an exhaust system, I mean, the car really comes alive.
I'm Andrew. I'm a Subaru expert, and you are watching the Aftermarket.
Hi, I'm Jermaine, and I'm a Subaru expert, and you're watching the Aftermarket.
Hi everyone, my name is Sam. I'm a Subaru enthusiast and like to believe I'm an expert, and you are watching the Aftermarket. So today the platform that we're talking about is the turbo models of the Subaru, Turbo EJ205, Turbo EJ257, and also the FA turbo engines. So today we're here at Andrewtech Automotive. We specialize in Subarus here, whether it's your Crosstrek that needs spark plugs done, or your Turbo STI that wants to go 9 seconds down the straight. We can handle all of that here. So the turbo Subarus are very popular in today's car culture. There's a lot of enthusiasts, a lot of followers. They have the boxer engine, the horizontally opposed engine with all-wheel drive system. So you can have a lot of fun with them. So if you're buying a new car and after the initial braking period, you want to start making more power, it's a little bit easier because all the fluids are fresh, the spark plugs are new, you know, all the bolts are going to be easy to come off and a clean car to work on, so it'll be very nice. But if you're buying a used car, and majority of the customers and majority of the cars here are used, they've had 2-3 owners now. In those situations, it costs a little bit more money. It takes a little bit more time to, make sure that the car is healthy before you start modifying. Because if you've got a cylinder that's low on compression, you don't want to slap on a bigger turbo and a full exhaust and injectors, fuel pump and stuff like that, and put it on the dyno and come to realize, it's not making the power that it should, because it's got a bad cylinder, or your spark plugs are too old and it's not performing when we need it to. So when you buy a used car, it may take a little bit more time and effort and money to get it up to par before you can start modifying it. One of the companies we work with is Advanced Auto Parts. They're 2 miles down the road, delivery to us. They always have the spark plugs we need, one-step coolers, oil filters, Rotella T6, which everyone loves nowadays. It's very good to have Advanced Auto Parts right down the road. So with our experience, the EJ FA platforms, they have their issues, just like any other platforms. The piston ringland failure is pretty common on our cars. Head gasket failing, those are pretty common. The valve cover gaskets are fairly common too, especially the passenger side, because the exhaust manifold and the up pipe runs up right under it. And on the 5-speed WRX transmission, the gears are referred to as glass. They will fail even at stock power levels. So we offer PPG gears here that handle more power. So there's so many factors that can go into a piston ringland failing in a Subaru. We've seen it happen on stock cars with 1,500 miles. We've never seen it happen on some cars. So that's the million-dollar question. But I think what's more important is if you're tuning it, have someone with a good reputation tuning the car, and just know anytime you mod any car, your reliability will go down. There's just no way about it. But there's a lot of aftermarket options now to try to battle some of those issues. So if you pass the health check, the very first modification that you want to do that's best bang for your buck is you really want to open up the exhaust system. The factory downpipe is very, very restrictive. Once you do an exhaust system, the car really comes alive. So for example, today in the shop, we had a customer come in with their 2020 STI, and he wanted to make more power, have more fun on the street. Thankfully, Cobb came to the rescue. Their new titanium catback, their bell mouth downpipe. We also instead installed a Cobb intake, and we were able to dyno tune the car afterwards. The car ended up making 372 foot-pounds of torque and 315 wheel horsepower. So when we go past stage 2, the factory location of the turbo is on the back side of the engine on the passenger side. So it's actually very limited, to say the least, as far as putting on a turbo that is way bigger in size. Then you would move on to a setup called a rotated turbo setup. You actually rotate the turbo to the right and further back to get the clearance that you need to put a giant turbo on there. You can also put them in the front. You can also put them on the front to the side. There's a lot of different options. So it can get very, very crazy and very interesting. So when a customer comes in and they want to make more than 360, 370 wheel horsepower, at that point in time, we may have to consider talking about a built bottom end. So we're talking forged pistons, forged rods. Once you build it so that you can actually enjoy it without the rings failing or spun rod bearing or something like that. The EJ and the FA platforms, they come with an intercooler, but they sit in the engine bay to the top. So we refer to them as a top mount intercooler. You've probably seen the hood scoops. That's kind of where the intercooler is. But again, it's very limited with size. There's companies that make larger ones, but the most efficiency is to have a front mount intercooler where you relocate the intercooler core to the front of the car behind the front bumper. So that will have to happen. Normally, we recommend that after, again, 360, 370 wheel horsepower, just to get maximum efficiency. So after modification, you really need to make sure that the car is dialed in correctly, and we do that on a dyno. People refer to it as a Pro Tune. Just making sure that every modification is calibrated correctly and that the brains of the car knows what it's working with.
Tuners typically know exactly how much power a car is going to make based on what modifications are on it. So that person should be accessible to you at all times. At TurboXS, we mostly work on Subarus, but we also tune other platforms, which is nice because you can see what works across the board. So we've been tuning for over 16 years, started in 2004 with our original UTech engine management system. And now, since time has gone on, we've basically leaned more into the Cobb tuning software, which is really good. A lot of cars that we tune are the EJ series. Now, basically 2015 on, we started to do more to the FA series, which is, it's a new thing, but still very Subaru. Definitely more modern car. It's good on gas mileage. You get a nice power band for the turbocharger that's on it. I mean, 3,000 to 6,000 RPM, that's a pretty good power band for a street car. EJ series is just as good, but your topping goal can be much higher. I mean, now you're starting to see 1,000 horsepower EJ's engines, and you're not quite seeing that with the FAs, but over time you'll start seeing that. So you can start with the reflash, which most people are going to do. It's going to get you at that about $600 to $700 price range just by reflashing your ECU. And then you have the upper end of that, which could be your standalone, which would be like an AEM or a Motec or something like that, which puts it on the outlier. Most people don't go that far, but for most of what you will want to do with a street car, the Cobb tuning software seems to be the best choice and gives you the most headroom. Say EJ engine, what your characteristic that you'll have is that it's not going to want to run very lean. So you have to keep the combustion chamber cool by running a richer AFR and not running a lot of timing. Once you start doing that, you start running into knock. And if you continue to do that over a long period of time, that's when you start having issues with the ringland. So the FA is a little bit different since it's a high compression direct injection engine. They also like to run rich because, I mean, we're still talking about a Subaru engine, so you still have to run much richer than you have to run most vehicles. You also find that they are very knock prone because of the higher compression ratio. In an EJ engine, you have a little more headroom when you would have a knock event. On the FA engine, it is definitely not something you want to have happen. You want to try and mitigate it as much as possible by having a good intercooler, which on the FA engines, the factory top mount intercooler, it's not the best. You want to keep those intake charge temperatures down. That helps keep your knock events very low. Also makes the car much more consistent when you're out on the street. Typically when we have a customer come in for a dyno appointment, I usually basically talk to them and try and get an idea of what their goals are for the vehicle. And most of the time they give you a high horsepower number that is crazy. It's like, I have a stage 2 car and I want it to make 400 horsepower. And you really have to give them a reality check of, well, I can't get you 400 horsepower out of these particular mods. And even if I could, it's not going to be very reliable if we did it that way. On an EJ engine, typically about 350, 360 horsepower is where you want to go without having to have a built motor. On the FA engines, as soon as we get around 330 to 350 foot-pounds, that's when I'm starting to worry about basically bending a rod or something happening on these cars. I know that there's numbers out there of people making way more horsepower and doing it for longer, but if you just look at just the data of people who have light modifications and what type of failures they have on the new FA engines, you see that the rods are bending at less than 330, 350 foot-pounds, and that's probably where you should say, yeah, if you're going to go above this, you probably should have a built motor. It's not a forged rod, and I think it just comes down to the cylinder pressure. I mean, you got I think 11.5 to 1 roughly compression ratio, and then you're adding 20 to 25 pounds of boost pressure on top of that. Something's got to give, and on a EJ engine, yeah, usually it's the ringland. On a FA engine, it's the rod. So the pros of the EJ engine is that we've got years of development. And so that means that a lot of the parts to make the horsepower is very inexpensive. So you can go from anywhere from 300 horsepower to, let's say, a reasonable 600 horsepower, and you can basically go to a store or an online shop and just say, all right, I want 600 horsepower, and they can tell you here's what it takes to do so. Pro for the FA engine would be that it really has great headroom on the factory turbocharger. You can make pretty much STI horsepower with the factory turbocharger on it, which is roughly around 300 to 320 horsepower, which is pretty impressive. And it also has really good fuel economy. That's kind of a nice thing to have when you're basically modifying your car, that you're not just basically throwing the money out the window, just paying for gas.
Yates-Auto, we focused mainly on Subarus. We're really passionate about these cars. I've worked on Subarus my whole life, and I can't get away from them. Early to mid-90s, I went to the factory training with Subaru for manual transmission. And did get a certification from them to rebuild manual transmissions. Did little jobs here and there, but didn't really start putting that to use until the WRX, and then really put it to use then. I kept track for a little bit, and then I lost track, focusing on trying to run a business and things like that. But I'd be surprised if the number were less than 1,000, and I'd also be surprised if is there anybody that's really rebuilt this many as I have, because if that's the case, then there's a much larger problem. For the WRX, we had the 5-speed, narrow gears, didn't take a lot of power to plow through that gear. So we had that, and then in 04, when we got the STI, that was the US market dipping their toe into the factory 6-speed. The STI, you only get a manual transmission and you only get the 6-speed. Much, much stronger gearbox. It will take a lot more abuse before the catastrophic failure. You can still wear out synchros, you can still burn up forks, you can still destroy your transmission, just like any other transmission, but the power capacity was much better, much improved with the 6-speed. So the CVTs, we can get the CVTs. I know that it's in the Outbacks, it's in the Imprezas. You can get a CVT in a WRX. I believe it's a different model. My understanding is they have a high torque capacity CVT that they use in the turbo model. I think it was model year 15 that they went to the split case 6-speed in the WRX. It's still similar to the 5-speed, and by the fact that it is a split case unit. It does still have the viscous center differential. It does still have transfer gears, output to the rear, dual output to the front. So it's a similar looking to the 5-speed, but then when you get into the guts of it, it looks much like a 6-speed inside, smaller. The split case 6-speed that comes in the WRX is, while it is a 1 through 6, and that's great, it is not an STI 6-speed. They're very different gearboxes. Cable shifter versus linkage shift. The actual width of the gears are huge in a 6-speed compared to the split case 6-speed and the 5-speed. There's no comparison. That's what everybody wants. Everybody wants the factory STI 6-speed. It's a pretty stout unit. I like them. A bit of a comparison, the 5-speed to 6-speed. I'm talking about gear width, gear size, and why these 6-speeds are able to handle a bit more power than the 5-speed. So this is second gear on a 6-speed, and this is second gear factory on a 5-speed. And you can see that we have several millimeters more of gear width. So that all translates to load capacity. That's the reason that the 6-speed will take quite a bit more of abuse than the 5-speed does. In regards to 5-speed, anywhere around 300 wheel horsepower or above, you really should start setting some money aside. To hold that kind of power, we have to upgrade clutch, so we're going to be transmitting that shock load directly to the gearbox, and that's when things can really fail and really start to come apart. I've never been told a rating on the 6-speed because manufacturers, actual vehicle manufacturers, they don't say that stuff. But I've seen them hold, I think the highest horsepower factory gearbox was around 900 horsepower. Yeah, if you're picking your poison, do I want a WRX, do I want an STI? The 5-speed versus the 6-speed is a relevant question. What will hold the power? What are your goals with the car? These are all things that you need to forward think about. If the 5-speed, with the way it works, is all you'll need power-wise, fine, you can save a bunch of money by just going with the WRX. If you want the capabilities of the 6-speed, then you're going to need to get the STI, but it'll also come with some additional things that you'll appreciate, also better brakes and nicer suspension. The difference isn't just the gearbox, but it is very relevant. Lots of folks are talking about, I want a 6-speed swap my car, I want a 6-speed swap my car, but I think I've only done like 10. To swap out all the components to actually properly put an STI 6-speed in the car, it's going to be pricey. By the time you get the axles, the drive shaft, the shifter linkage, the clutch, and the transmission itself, and get it all fitted in there, could you have put an aftermarket gear set in your 5-speed and actually save money? There's several manufacturers of aftermarket gears for the Subaru gearboxes in Australia, and they offer synchro engagement, straight cut gears, helical cut gears, and the dog engagement also in straight cut or helical cut. Set your goal to know what you're going to need and go from there.
There's a tremendous amount of information available, and if you search and use the right resources, basically anything and everything you want to do has been researched already and tried. These cars can run the full spectrum from daily driver to weekend track car only, and all the options are available.